and thanks for joining us today on Arts 24, tributes to the luminous star of European cinema's golden age, Claudia Cardinale.
Cinema saved my life because I was wild. I never used to speak. That's why I have this voice. It really saved me.
From an accidental start after winning a beauty contest in Tunisia, she became unforgettable in films like Fellini's 8½ and Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. To talk about her legacy, I'm joined by our film critic, Emma Jones. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. Now, she once said, the fact I'm making movies is just an accident. And that accident has given us more than 100 films. She was a real icon, wasn't she?
She really was a happy accident, as you say, that she became an actress. And in the 1960s, she was really seen along with Sophia Loren and Gina Lollobrigida, you know, as one of these 3 Italian sirens who could make movies all over the world, known for their beauty, but also, of course, their acting ability. And that gave us so much classic cinema of the era. However, there was just something about Claudia, you know, in particular, that was just very down to earth, and she was known as Italy's sweetheart in the 1960s because of her relatability.
Well, Claudia Cardinale died in the French town of Nemours, near Paris, in the presence of her children. We'll talk more about her legacy in just a moment, but first, let's look back at her life with Yinka Oyitade.
With her fierce beauty and husky voice, Claudia Cardinale captivated audiences. An icon of the 60s who was a living legend. At just 25, she starred next to leading man Burt Lancaster in The Leopard, directed by her mentor and cinema master, Luchino Visconti. It all started in Tunisia in 1938. Claudia was born Claude to Sicilian parents. She spoke French at school and the Sicilian dialect at home. She had no intention of becoming an actress, but at 17, a beauty contest changed everything.
I was suddenly thrust into the spotlight and crowned the most beautiful Italian woman in Tunisia. I was offered a trip to the Venice Film Festival, and that's how it all began.
An incredible career would follow. Over 100 films with directors like Fellini in 8½ and Sergio Leone in Once Upon a Time in the West. She appeared alongside fellow cinema legends. Alain Delon was one of them. Claudia Cardinale loved action films and did her own stunts. Free, bold, and unapologetically feminist.
Je suis le docteur Miller. Drôle d'endroit pour ouvrir un cabinet. Vous avez une spécialité? Oui. Les dingues.
Claudia Cardinale appeared alongside Brigitte Bardot and was celebrated as one of the most beautiful women in the world. She never hid her age, embracing every wrinkle like a badge of honor.
J'ai jamais rien fait.
I've never done anything to stop time, because I believe you have to accept it.
She was forced to hide the existence of her son, the result of a rape, for years. She later had a daughter with the love of her life, director Pasquale Scritieri. Claudia Cardinale was the most French of Italian actresses who dominated the screen and stage.
Well, we saw them together there. Claudia Cardinale was actually touted as Italy's answer to Brigitte Bardot. What were her most memorable performances, would you say?
Yes, well, going back to her early career, really, that when she first started acting, I'd say one of her breakout roles was I Bel Antonio, and that was by Mauro Bollolini. It won the Golden Leopard at Locarno, and this was a drama that's she plays a woman in an arranged marriage to a man played by Marcello Mastroianni, one of the greatest actors of all time, and her first pairing with him. She had another fantastic role, her first leading role, A Girl with a Suitcase, in 1961, where she played a nightclub owner and a young mother. And as a young mother herself, as you heard in that report there, she brought great emotion to that role, and that played at the Cannes Film Festival. However, 1963 really
was the year
proved
for her,
to be
wasn't
her
it?
year. I mean, what a year for her, really. She was filming The Leopard, directed by Luchino Visconti. Of course, that's a great Italian period drama starring Burt Lancaster and Alain Delon. And also, she was filming 8½. By Federico Fellini, one of the greatest movies ever made, of course, and again starring opposite Marcello Mastroianni. At the same time, she also went on to star in The Pink Panther as an Italian princess opposite David Niven. So all of this brought her worldwide fame, and then you can skip on a few years and another standout performance from her in Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West, the all-time, I think, classic so-called spaghetti western, where she more than held her own against the likes of Henry Fonda.
Okay, well, I actually interviewed Claudia Cardinale back in 2013, and she spoke to me about choosing European cinema over Hollywood's bigger opportunities. Take a listen.
I did many movies in America, but they want me to stay there. But I said, no, I'm European. And I came back all the time. But I've been, very lucky because I've been doing film with big directors, Richard Brooks and Rita Hayworth, John Wayne, Burt Lancaster. I mean, lots of actors, fantastic.
And you were the star of Fellini's 8½, and Visconti's The Leopard. Very different styles
Just
of
the
cinema.
opposite. The opposite.
How did they compare? Tell us.
It's incredible because with Visconti it was like doing theater. Everything has to be very precise. With Federico, no script. Improvisation. No script. Can you imagine? Just the opposite.
What a life. And she was so down to earth, given all of that experience with all those legends in cinema history. But her films, Hollywood films like Blindfold, they only brought partial success, didn't they? It was really her European work with Fellini, Visconti and Leone that created cinematic history, wasn't it?
Indeed, and I found it so interesting there, her talking just about the fact that she made this decision to come back to Europe and presumably do the more interesting films that she thought were in Europe. And some of her best work, 1971, Les Pétroleuses, or in English, I believe it's called The Legend of Frenchy, where she was put opposite Brigitte Bardot. Of course, the press had tried to create some kind of rivalry between them as screen icons, but in fact, in real life, they got on famously well.
Even in the interview I did, actually, she talked about how much she admired Brigitte Bardot, how she thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world, how there was no rivalry whatsoever.
Well, this is lovely. And in this film, directed by Christian Jacques, it really parodied Westerns, and a lot of Hollywood tropes at the time. So that's why you've got them there having a slight bit of fisticuffs and a shootout. So really, I think that film was really ahead of its time. If you think of, all the gender reverses at the moment, trying, that have over the last few years trying to put women in these traditional roles played by men. Well, she and Bardot were doing it more than 50 years ago.
And it really was the film 8½ that was in 1963. That really was one that put her on the map as well, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And her chemistry, I think, with Marcello Mastroianni, is for the ages, for sure. But this movie by Federico Fellini, consistently voted in some of the top 10 movies of all time. It is an absolute classic, and it means her name will live forever.
OK, well, let's take a look now at a scene from that film, 8½ from 1963.
Andiamo via di qui. Mi fa impressione questo posto. Non mi sembra vero.
A me invece piace moltissimo, guarda un po'.
Della storia che mi hai raccontato non ho capito quasi niente. Ma scusa, un tipo così, come tu l'hai descritto, che non vuol bene a nessuno, non fa mica tanta pena, sai. In fondo è colpa sua. Che cosa pretende dagli altri?
Perché credi che io non lo sappia? Come sei noiosina.
Now, in all the clips that we see, one thing that comes across is that deep voice that she had. But she also had a very strong French accent, because French, even though she was an Italian actress was her first language, and it meant that she was often dubbed, or in her early films anyway. Tell us more about that.
Yes, in fact, the Fellini 8.5 was the first time she actually got to use her real voice in any of her movies, because, as you say, she grew up speaking French and she spoke Sicilian, not Italian. So I guess her Italian was thought to have a strong French accent. So really it was Fellini who gave her the first opportunity to be heard. And I believe that she's also been dubbed in the Pink Panther as well. So it's really only from the late 60s onwards that you get to hear that glorious voice of hers. Yet, you know, possibly because of that early dubbing, she said of herself that she thought she had a very strange voice, you know, at first. But thank goodness we got to hear it.
Well, from winning that beauty contest back in Tunisia when she was only 17 to receiving the Golden Lion Award for Lifetime Achievement Award at Venice nearly 40 years later. She was also a UN Goodwill Ambassador. She had this remarkable journey. Looking at this body of work now, how do you think film history will remember her contribution to cinema most of all?
I think she was one of the greatest female icons of one of the greatest decades for Italian cinema, for sure, if you think of what Italian cinema produced during that period. And I'm also thinking about Once Upon a Time in the West, you know, which was an Italian-American co-production. She really owned the roles that she had. She had an independence of spirit and a mystery to her, I think. You know, even when she was silent in a scene, just using her eyes, there was a mystery to her. And I think she was asked, you know, by journalists during her career of the secrets of her success, and she said mystery, you know, never to give too much away of herself or of her body. And I think that will linger on in screen for decades.
Emma Jones, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you. Now we're going to leave you with a scene from The Pink Panther from 1963, where Claudia Cardinale plays Princess Dala. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Well, are you?
What?
What they call you? The Virgin Queen.
I'm not the queen.
That's only half an answer.
I was 6 when I went on my first safari. Frazari. Wild animal hunt.
Oh, sir, what are you looking at now? Are those the bedroom scenes? Aha, they are, aren't they?